Welcome back to the Wisdom Journey podcast, the show where we dive into the rich stories behind content creators making an impact. I am your host, Wisdom Okonkwo. Today we're joined by someone who's mastered the act of chaos and creativity, Gavin Bellour. Gavin is a creative director, filmmaker, comedy writer, and father of four who spent over 15 years building a bold and unconventional career, from working with brands like Netflix and Vogue to convincing Martha Stewart to swear on camera. Gavin brings a unique mix of storytelling, brilliance, and raw authenticity. If you've ever wondered how to balance wide ideas, tight deadlines, this episode is for you. Let's jump into this journey. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah. Okay. So I'll ask you a couple of get to know questions, and then we'll start with the content viral piece. You've
Great.
had this wide multi-career journey. You've been an actor. You've been a musician. You've been a filmmaker. You've been an agency partner. What's the one skill from those early days that still helps you most today?
I mean, it's storytelling. That's all I've ever been good at in a weird, funny way. It's the only thing I've ever made a living at. When you're acting, you're telling stories. When you're making music, you're writing stories and writing lyrics, and then you're performing stories. And, I came up in the theater as a kid, and then that sort of branched out into, that earlier part of my career. And then all of that sort of filtered into commercials and creative direction and directing. And it's all kind of, those fundamentals don't really change, I think. And maybe I'm a little self-serving in thinking that, this is what we've been doing as humans for, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years since we've been painting on cave walls and stuff. But, I think the fundamentals of what makes a story and why we're connected to it don't really change, although the platforms do. And the fundamentals of those platforms can. But at the end of the day, I think you need to keep both in mind, what's happening on TikTok or, whatever the next newest, biggest thing is not necessarily that different from, at its fundamental core from a scene in a movie or a whole movie or a song. It's all, character, conflict, resolution, emotion, connection, and that's the thing that I think goes through most great art. I like to think, I don't know, at least that's my opinion. So I think that as a skill in understanding the connection and human connection is really kind of at the heart of this is the one thing that I've kind of always leveraged and always been pretty passionate about.
You've worked with everyone from Kevin Bacon to Martha Stewart. What's the most absurd only in Hollywood moment you experienced?
Most absurd?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, the Kevin Bacon thing was pretty funny because it was like, it was absurd maybe in a different way than you mean. It was a really funny idea from this agency called Yard NYC in New York. And they're really funny and just known for kind of being just really smart. And I'm not sure I can't even remember how the job came through us, but it was a very, very low budget thing. And the whole idea was to be a very let's just make it on like a dumb green screen. And so you have Kevin Bacon, who, has been around for at this point 20, 30 years, probably more than that for sure. And he's a huge Hollywood actor who's done a million things. And we're sort of trying to dumb it down and make it really silly and stupid and intentionally make it a bad green screen. And it was just like so absurd and so funny because he was so game for it. And, it's actually kind of hard and you have to think hard how to make things bad, but there's a lot of humor in it, And so that was incredibly fun because we had him floating in front of the moon with the balloon. And then there was this reoccurring gag of like a gospel choir coming back and kicking in. And so we found a gospel choir in Brooklyn and brought them out. And then we all of a sudden were like, what if we made the entire, if Kevin's part of the gospel choir, holy cow, then he's in the gospel choir. Then what if we made a whole thing of Kevin, just a whole gospel choir of Kevin? And it just got so absurd. But he was just with us the whole time, and we were just spinning out these dumb ideas and kind of just riffing. And I wouldn't call it a Hollywood moment because it was just like a little studio in Brooklyn, but it felt very fun, and it was definitely absurd. So that was certainly one of the more fun. I'm sure there's plenty of other like Hollywood type things that we could talk about, but Hollywood it feels very different than what we do sometimes, although we get to do fun things and shoot in fun places. But sometimes it's big, huge, crazy productions, and sometimes it's tiny little ideas, and sometimes the things that are the smallest do the best, and sometimes the big things are too big. And I think one of the things that gets in the way sometimes is the amount of layers between creating something and putting something out. When there's too many of those, I think it can kind of stifle creativity. And that's one of the cool things about social now and all the new platforms is that it's really a direct voice that can get out really quickly. And some of every brand right now is trying to figure out how to how to be that, favorite voice on this social channel or social network or whatever. What most of them don't realize is that they're always trying to approve everything, and their CMO is always trying to chime in, and they have 14, 15 different people in 3 months to approve a concept. And the ones that are doing a really good job are the ones that just like put somebody in charge of it and let them fail, let them try, let them do stuff, and kind of give them a little bit of edge and agency. And in general, my favorites and the ones that seem to do really well move quickly and can move quickly. So I think that's a really important key to success.
Yeah, and that's that's one of the problems all big corporate companies they have. It's the bureaucracy, the red tape. You have to go through a lot of hoops before you get an idea done.
Yeah, absolutely. I was listening to a talk a couple weeks ago, and probably shouldn't say the brand, but I think the quote, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, was basically like, if our CMO gets what we're doing, we're probably doing something wrong, and our CMO agrees with that. And I was like, okay, that's really smart. I mean, obviously, like having a cool CMO who's like, do your thing, man, is great. But like, and it's true, they do amazing things and they mess up and they fix it, but they just play with it. And it's such an interesting platform. And specifically social, obviously YouTube and other platforms can be a little bit different and the lines are blurring. But I think the ability to just kind of play tends to resonate really well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for those anecdotes and stories you shared. Now it's time for us to get into the episode topic, which is the first question I'd love to start with is, what's your definition of viral content?
Viral content? I mean, it's funny. You said viral, like like viral.
Yeah, viral.
I think it's just, I don't want to call it a dead word. It's a word that you hear all the time. And I almost don't hear anymore because it became so, there was a period of time where everything was just like, make it go viral, make it go viral. And, I think it's just something that's got a life of its own. I think people sort of used to lay an arbitrary thing of like, oh, it's got to, when it hits 1 million or whatever. But I mean, you'll see those, if you're getting 100 and all of a sudden, you get 100 hits on every video or 1,000, right? And then all of a sudden you're getting, 10,000 or whatever. Like you're just seeing a dramatic peak, an increase. Like I would consider that viral for your world, I think. And then you build off of that and you double down, you figure out what's working and you keep doing that. And then you'll get those things that go, worldwide viral or whatever. But you're just looking for those little things that move the needle, And so I would say for people starting out, I think it's important, whether it's brands or individual stuff, is just look for those little peaks, because that's feedback. Your audience will tell you what they want to see and hear, and ideally those things align. And as soon as you see those little peaks, you got to break that down and figure out, okay, what was I talking about? A certain thing? Is it a certain location? And it's all experimentation. It's a trial and error kind of environment, I think, and a test and it's a little bit of a science, a little bit of an art. So I would say anything viral is just the things that any kind of dramatic increase or noticeable increase would be what you should be looking for in terms of viral stuff.
Yeah. I like the fact that you say that virality in a way can be relative. I mean, most of the times a lot of persons want to compare themselves with other big influencers out there. But it's important to compare ourselves to what we were like yesterday, last week, last month, and see how we're growing, how we're changing over time. The follow-up question is virality luck, strategy, or both?
Both.
Okay.
I think, obviously luck favors the prepared.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, and this is, that's a really good question. That's a great question. Here's the thing, man. I might get in trouble for saying this, but yeah, like I've seen, you can, I don't know. Strategy is really important. I'm not much of a strategist. I get hired to do strategy. I can talk strategy. It's not my thing. I'm a guy that makes dumb stuff that I like, and it's fun. And I sort of interpret strategy and story and ultimately connect those two things. There are really brilliant people that do strategy, but the ones that are the brilliant strategists don't think about it too much and don't it doesn't need to be a 70-page deck. And that's more in the branding world than the content creation world. My point is, you can overthink strategy pretty easy. Strategy ultimately is what works. 90% of strategy, in my opinion, is kind of bullshit. That's what I'm going to get in trouble for saying. It's not bullshit. It doesn't mean anything, but like there are, I don't know, I've probably worked with, maybe 15 or 20 like truly brilliant strategists who really get it. Most of the strategy that we read is just filler. It's just, I think this works why, or sometimes it's written just to sell an idea that we know will work through. And you're kind of just working backwards to sort of back it in so somebody can feel okay with paying for it or doing it. And usually it works, but sometimes that backfires, and it's, that's not my my approach. I wouldn't say, lie, but I'm just saying that like the best strategy is going to be reactive to the things that work. And it's all a little bit of a theory. You probably can go online and find out how to make, type in how to make videos go viral, and you'll get, a lot of it's the first few seconds and authenticity and, all the sort of typical stuff. And a lot of that is true, but also, everybody's got to find out what your voice means to your audience, right? And you can kind of couch that in authenticity, but at the end of the day, you don't know. And so strategy has to be reactive, and it has to react to something. And I would just say, again, it's a test and learn environment. So especially when you're starting out, you may be talking about this thing, but your audience isn't really listening, and you try this other thing, or you try something and you see that little thing change and shift, and your strategy then has to change, and you have to observe that and be in a position to look at that and be willing to go, how can I change this? And how can I adapt to see what's really moving the needle? And that's real strategy. Part of your strategy is changing your strategy sometimes. And I think there are fundamentals. Like the fundamentals of marketing haven't changed, but there are trends and there are platforms and there are things that shift. So you have to look for those real true core ideas, and you have to be willing to totally undo and unlearn something when it's not working, or something you did is totally working and it doesn't make sense because it worked. And if it worked, it should work again.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best strategy, is like test, learn, observe, and keep doing the stuff that's working. And the stuff that's not working, don't do that. That's like the simplest strategy. And ultimately, every good strategy ultimately is really just about that. And it's more about identifying and being able to understand what that strategy is and what is working. Everything else is just like speculation.
Yeah.
And it can be speculation built on a lot of information, and speculation that's built on a lot of experience with brands and what should work and what certain brands and niches like. But at the end of the day, you don't know until you can get the needle to move for you and your audience. And then you know.
Yeah. Very, very, very important. Because a lot of strategy out there's a disconnect between what the audience actually wants, what they actually care about, and what's actually working. Like they've not even tested or seen anything. Just like a bunch of stuff online, and they just put it together. Some of them is even AI generated, and it has nothing to do with what actually works. Because you could actually, let's say, for example, someone who comes up from, I don't know, let's say the gaming industry, and you could have an idea, a strategy and stuff like that for videos that you did, and they did well for in the gaming industry. But now you're making videos for the elderly, people in their 70s, 80s, right? And now this is a completely different audience. And you're saying, okay, because we did
For sure.
what we did in the gaming, we had to, like, let's say in the videos, we had to, like, every 2 seconds, we had to change something in the screen. Things had to be moving fast. And you try it, and the people are like, they're complaining, they're like, this stuff is moving too fast. And you're like, no, it worked. It has to work. I think one of the things you said about strategy is that we have to, like, realize that we're just trying to find what works. Like, we could be wrong. And yeah, that's basically the idea. It's not like this is the one size fits all. It's just like, okay, this is what we're going to use until we find something better.
Yeah. And a lot of it works, and you'll see what works and what doesn't. But yeah, 100%, like it's a place to start, and you just got to try stuff, And again, it has to align with your brand. It's not just like totally, it has to align with your brand and your voice and what you want to say, what you want to do, what you're trying to convey. I heard it described once as, it's a brand is really about building trust, right? So trust is developed over time, right? So you can't put one piece of content out and think it's going to go viral.
Yeah.
It's about, what am I going to say to a friend every day? And what's that conversation feel like? What type of conversation you want to have, and that is the type of relationship you want to have. Am I a teacher? Am I a friend? Am I a medical advisor? Am I a jester? Like what is the relationship that I want to have with my customer or my audience or whatever it is? Everything should align with that, because it's a conversation, even though it's sort of seemingly one-sided, but you're getting feedback from them in likes and shares and engagement and comments. And so listen to them. Again, like your audience will tell you what they want to hear. And so, being engaged is more than just sort of, responding. It's about listening to what the audience is saying and conveying all those things. But it's a conversation, and you want to do that. So I think it's important to remember that and keep the conversation there. And remember that it's a if I walked into a room was just like blah and then walked away, you'd be like, what the heck was that, right? But if you and I are sitting here having a conversation, you say things, I say things, you say things, I say things, and that's the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's all content creation really is.
Yeah. I like the analogy you made. You've been doing this for a very long time. What's a piece of content you created that unexpectedly blew up, and why do you think it did?
There's been a few of those. There was this one, it blew up in its world. I don't know that anybody would ever see it. And when I watch it now, it feels impossibly dated. And like, it's not in my reel or anything like that, but we won several awards for it. It was probably our first big thing. It was this job it's the country of Holland. And they were looking for a sort of a U.S. content creation partner to help advertise Holland and sort of change the opinion of, in the U.S., there was sort of the old, Holland is about drugs and,
Yeah.
more adult things and stuff like that. And they were sort of wanting to sort of shift that up, just shift the approach. We were pitching against, this is with Mustache. It was our early days at Mustache, which is an agency that I was an early partner at and was with for nearly a decade with some good friends of mine who started it and then brought me and one other guy in, and then we grew it and sold it. But this is our kind of early days, and we were very scrappy and just looking for kind of new content and new ideas and new friends. And we were pitching against some real big agencies, and we had no business, pitching against these people, but somehow we got the brief and they liked us, and we were like, okay, well, let's just take a big swing,
Yeah.
And so we came up with this idea that was basically like, let's make the anti-tourism video. And it was just kind of our personality, and we made a whole thing. The insight that it was based on was that, at the time, and even so now, but back then it was sort of hipster culture. This is sort of early, like 2012, 2011, 2013-ish. There was this sort of fetishizing of authenticity and artisanal goods and organic food. And again, all these things are great, but that was kind of the thing in Brooklyn and in the cities in the US where we were really marketing to. And the sort of insight was that, like, well, Holland has been doing this stuff since way before it was cool. Right. So it's like the original cool was the idea. And then we just made it this really quirky, weird thing. And we wrote this insane script and they bought it. And so for 4 years, I think we went there twice a year and shot this series of stuff. And it was like done on a shoestring, but it was so much fun and it did really, really well. And it made a huge impact. And again, it didn't look amazing. It was just like really good performance, really good storytelling, a really funny idea and insight. And we didn't take ourselves seriously. And we kind of like allowed everyone to laugh at the fact that we were making, advertising content, but it kind of earned the right to give your message because it was creative and funny enough to do so. And it was just a little weird and a little off, and it kind of fit the character of the country. Not that the country's off at all. It had just a very kind of like lovingly self-deprecating, self-aware, conscious ability to sort of be itself and say something and be fun and funny. And I think that was kind of the beginning of where I started to really fall in love with sort of quirkier, weirder. I mean, that's just sort of my natural inclination for humor. But I think that showed me and us, a lot of our work that we did was sort of just a little bit off, a little bit out there, a little bit meta, a little bit quirky, and that we felt like some of that kind of stuff could really work for brands. And so we started to gravitate towards that. And I think it's because it just sort of was a little bit of a big swing. And I like stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the fact that, I think this is just an observation from me. What I think made that content kind of perform well is the fact that I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a way corporate ads sound like you, without it even being, without a disclaimer or anything. Sometimes when you're watching an ad, majority of the ad, you know that this is an ad.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But then there are some ads that they are actually different. They're like funny comedy sketches. Like if someone doesn't tell you that it's an ad, you will not even believe that it's an ad. Like it's something that makes you laugh, provides value to you. Yeah. And then you're like, so it's an ad. Oh, I didn't even know that one. Yeah.
That's the best stuff, man. And I'll tell you what, we struggle with that. I struggle with that in projects every day. Like I probably had that conversation 3 times this week, and it's Monday, at least where I am. It's just, especially because, and I think every brand, every adventure kind of can be this complicated, but particularly when you're dealing with some bigger brands, but you're trying to layer in so many different things and you're trying to pre-plan it, but you're also trying to make it feel original and authentic. And that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
When there's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of significance around certain things. So it is always, particularly with these newer platforms where, when it was broadcast, there's sort of watching TV, it's up next to movies and television shows and reality shows and stuff. So there's a sort of set thing that we've been doing with broadcast advertising for decades and decades now. But with social, it really is that kind of like, I can take up my phone and put it in front of my face and, hit send, and there's millions of people could see that potentially. Nobody cares about my social content, but that's fine because I don't create on that. But I'm just saying, like functionally, you could do that. You know what I mean? I sort of preserve, like, I don't want to do that for me because I have to sort of use that brain for everybody else. But my point
you
is
have
that,
that
like,
creative freedom.
yeah. Whereas, so I think that complication of, like, how do you pre-plan it but make it feel thing, that's the alchemy of it. You know what I mean? And it's really tricky. And, I think there's ways and reasons to that. But, I think it's helpful to know for people who are starting or smaller brands who are, looking for, oh man, I can't wait until I have more money to do more writing or more equipment or more blah, 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 blah. Like, no, because you get there and it's more complicated. It's Jay-Z, more money, more problems. You know what I mean? And it's actually harder. It's harder because now you're trying to say more and you have more stakeholders and more at stake. And I think if you spend time really just serving your audience, creating the conversation, figuring out what you like to say, what you can say, how you can do it on a regular basis in a way, and not worry so much about production value, just like what's funny, what's fun, what's resonating. As you get to the later stages and you grow, like, that'll all be there, But, the amount of times that we've had, I don't know, some insane amounts of money, $500,000 to create something, and then we spend a month trying to dumb it down and make it look more authentic, which ultimately means it looks like an iPhone.
Yeah.
I mean, constantly, you know what I mean? But we had to shoot it with all this equipment, or sometimes you're doing it with the other way around. It's just like, it just gets more complicated. And none of those things, particularly in these platforms, really matter. It's about connecting with your audience. It's about, what's your brand persona, and what's your brand persona? What's the hook? What emotion how are you engaging your audience? What emotional connection are you creating with your audience? And what flavor of that connection is that? That's it, period. And it's kind of an equalizer in that manner.
You talk about emotional hooks. What are the 3 most powerful ones creators should use?
I'm a big fan of joy and surprise. That's kind of mine. I kind of tend to think that, like, whether it's comedy or humor, I tend to open up and I tend to like to create stuff that my favorite stuff to make or find moments in or watch is when I'm seeing myself or something I know or my world on screen. You feel seen. You know what I mean? So, like, as a parent, seeing that one little, as a new dad, fumbling around, wait, which way does the diaper go? I've been there. I see that. They understand me. Oh my God. Okay, cool. Now I'm seen. They see me. They understand me. Now I'm a little more open to that conversation, right? So for me, it's just that knowing, just that sense of being understood and seen. I'm not sure which emotion that is. Obviously, if you can take that and then it's like the joy of seeing something.
I think we could call that empathy.
Appeal. Maybe that's empathy. Yeah. I don't know. Nostalgia. Yeah, I guess it would be empathy. Yeah. But I think it's a little bit more than that too. I guess it is. It's an empathic part. I'm not sure. Like, I think of empathy a little differently, but it is just like, it's being seen. It's like there's a detail that they understand, and I see myself in that. And I think most humor ultimately comes from that if you get really out there.
Yeah.
Every time you've watched an awkward date on a movie or a TV show, we've all been there. We know what that feels like, and that's where that humor and tension is derived from.
Yeah.
I think nostalgia is pretty big right now. And I'm not sure kind of where you are or the markets you're in and what that looks like for you guys, but for here, it's a lot about the 90s and some of those kinds of things and maybe early 2000s, actually 90s to 2000s definitely here in terms of eras, but there's a lot of nostalgia going on right now. And it shows up in everything from styling to music to typefaces to colors. And that's definitely something that people are talking a lot about. I would say, probably one of the most effective, but the ones that I generally don't like to lean into is fear. It's a very easy one, and there are certainly products that would lend itself to that. That's not something that I want to create because just for me, I like to kind of focus on a little bit more positive things, but certainly it's an effective one. I wouldn't shy away from using it if that's something that's really driving your thing, but there are definitely people who are operating on that one in terms of, how to get a product or a story told. But yeah, I don't know. I love delight and surprise. Those are my favorites. And I think those are the ones that are genuinely universal. And, certainly with all the craziness we felt, in the last 5 or 10 years, really the last 5 in particular, and just general uncertainty, I think humor went away for a minute. And I think we're kind of seeing humor and surprise and delight is definitely more out there. And that doesn't need to be comedy. Again, it's just seeing yourself, seeing something, having that moment of like, that's smart. Oh, I could see that. You know what I mean? And I think that means a lot to people right now.
Yeah. You talk about humor, like as one of the, how do I explain that? It's one of the things you like to lean towards when it comes to creating content because, it's entertaining.
Yeah.
it's relatable, and yeah, amongst many other things. How do we balance this humor with deeper emotional connection resonance?
Ooh. I mean, I think the best humor has emotional resonance, trying to think of a good example. Obviously there is stock humor and archetypes and just sort of slapstick, right? But like ultimately, I'm trying to think of a good reference from a film or something that's very universal. But like ultimately, usually there's an obstacle and a character trying to get to something, right? And there's something in the way. And what we're seeing is that's the very basic thing of drama, period. Any story, any film is one character trying to get something and something else is in the way, or a series of things in the way. And humor is just a series of things that are visually funny, conceptually funny, or, orally funny, the way they sound, the way they feel, and their experience, and you're just laughing at their experience and it's usually pretty terrible or embarrassing, right? Or often is. And so again, that's seeing ourselves and feeling that the empathy of what that would be like, whether we understand it or not. But I think that all good humor is anchored in emotion and connection. I think without that, you don't feel for the main character. You don't feel for the character that you're looking at. And I think if you remove emotion and connection from humor, it's generally not that funny. And sometimes that's where you see something that should be funny or feels funnier, but it just falls flat.
Yeah.
It's because you don't care about that character. It's the same reason when you see him, if you see a whole movie based on a character that you just don't like, nobody cares. There's a very famous book that's about screenwriting called Save the Cat.
Yeah.
And not to give the whole thing away because it's about much more than this, but like the whole thing is like, like there's a whole film and it's amazingly written, but you got to save the cat. You got to see the guy in the film save a cat in the beginning so you know he's a good guy and then you want to root for him. You know what I mean? Kind of same thing. And you have to be connected to them and you have to be connected to the brand. And in order to have good humor, I think if you don't have that connection, it just generally doesn't work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to reiterate, some of the emotional hooks you shared, you talked about joy, you talked about surprise, you also talked about nostalgia, you talked about empathy, and then I know the empathy was more like in quotes, would also call that relatable content that is, relevant and specific, that has a specificity relatable to the audience that's consuming it. And then you said one of those other things you don't get to touch, but it's one of the things that's in the industry is fear and then negativity.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely see that out there. I mean, I don't know, again, like what you guys hear there, but especially on the radio here, it's like, with the uncertainty you have here, invest in gold or whatever it is, and there's certainly a lot of that in certain industries and I won't call them out, but it's definitely a very common thing. And I think you can do it in more clever, smart ways. There's definitely things to be, it's an emotional leverage. It's a matter of how you choose you want to do it. I think, trying to think of those other ones. I mean, happiness, joy, but again, it all kind of falls under empathy. We obviously want to try to create, again, I think so much of which levers you want to pull, which emotions you want to create, again, are about what's the story you want to tell, what's the brand persona of your brand, and what role do you want to play in the life of your viewer or consumer. Obviously a lot of my language is sort of geared towards selling and branding, but a lot of people are just making content to make content. But at the end of the day, like, your viewer is someone you're going to have a conversation with. And for them, is there a problem you're solving, or is it just entertaining? Is there something you can teach? Generally the thing with entertaining and teaching, there's sort of, if you break content creators into teachers or entertainers ultimately, I think, have a harder time, because if you're just purely entertaining, you have to keep one-upping yourself.
Yeah.
And that's not always sustainable, and I think if you can teach something, and it could even be like, I'm entertaining. Okay, cool. Here's how I just entertained you. Cool, take a look at that and see what your audience does with that, because maybe they'll go, whoa, okay, cool. And if you're, I don't know, what I mean? That's just something to think about too, is kind of, what are you? Are you teaching, or are you just entertaining? Can you do both? There's a whole, I told you I come from a theater background, and one of our first things we always studied was this thing from Aristotle, which is about the whole purpose of theater, which at the time is really all they had for storytelling, but I think it applies, is really, it's teaching and pleasing. That's it. The whole diatribe about it. And so I think if you can do, to teach him, the purpose of theater is to teach and please. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it was. And by theater, again, that was kind of that plays, right? So that could mean anything now. And I think if you can do both, if you can teach and please, then I think you're doing a really good job. And I think that's a sustainable way to create content.
Now, I know I've been asking you one question. Let's get to we're going to get into some tactics now. If you're giving a bland brief, like sell car insurance, right? What's your process for turning that sell car insurance brief into a story people can remember?
Okay, what's sell car insurance?
Yeah, sell car insurance.
Oh, car insurance. Okay. Well, I'm actually been working on a car insurance thing for
Wow.
quite a while. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, for them, it's really funny because in the United States, car insurance, there's like 3 or 4 really big, well-known brands, and they've just leaned into the humor and created these characters. They all sort of have characters, and they've personified their characters. Some of them are individuals. One of them's a cartoon. Some of them are a group. But they've really gone into characters, spokespeople that are kind of fun and funny. And in general, they have different tactics about it. And I think they're all pretty well known. One is a little bit more focused on the sort of the customer or the customers or the people that don't have their insurance are sort of the butt of the joke. One's a little bit more, for example, their spokespeople are always kind of the butt of the joke, and the customer is always sort of the more relatable one. And there's one that's a cartoon, and that's just kind of funny. And there's a few others. In those cases, I think you've leaned into character, right? I think if I were to start from scratch, and it's hard because I've been sort of working on this one for so long, I think you look into the relatable human aspect of it, right? Like, what's funny? And again, I'm always going to start with humor because that's where I'm going to go. And I think that tends to stand out. But what's funny about getting in a car accident? Probably not much, right? But you can kind of make it funny. You know what I mean? You can have a cute visual thing of like old people driving. You can have young people driving. You can have, the situation of a dad being really scared to give to teach their kid to drive. There's a lot of humor in that, where's the tension in that? Or like the first time a kid, is taking the car out by themselves, you know what I mean? And the kid's all confident, and the mom or dad are like, you know what I mean? That's a very humorous moment that everybody understands because most people have been on one side of that, if not both, at a certain point. And so I think you look for those moments of connection, that kind of, you were calling it all, empathic moments of like, what's the human story here? What's the human piece of this? You know what I mean? Then you can extrapolate that and relate it to other things. For example, okay, cool. So what are other areas that I wish I could be prepared in life? If they only had insurance for this or that or the other thing, well, they don't, but at least you can do this. That's a kind of a common one that's run with one up here. But the basic insight there is that, like, I mean, wouldn't it be great if you could have insurance for, I don't know, your football match, and because you played crappy and you wish you could get that match back, or whatever, so like that's just an insight. So we extrapolate that, we make it a relatable across any other category other than insurance, and then you bring that message back to insurance and you use that hook to sell the insurance, So again, I think it is all about the story, and I think it's all about the finding those moments that we understand. That's an emotional connection, the emotional connection. I mean, I've seen that spot a million times, the parent and the driver, and there's the funny version of it. And there's a really famous one here that's like a very heartfelt, beautiful, like, montage of a dad and his daughter. And, she's driving, and then he looks over and it's her when she's 3, and then it's her when she's 5, and it's her when she's 6, and so it's like kind of seeing her, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's grown up. And it's like a total tearjerker, and it's beautiful, and that's a completely different take on the same moment.
Yeah.
You're just taking that same idea, but it's human and it's connected. And then you're positioning yourself either as, in a humorous way or a heartfelt way, or ideally both, as the person who can provide this service and that you need it and you should have it because it's got an emotional thing. And, oh yeah, okay, cool. I should probably have that for my kid, or I should have that for myself, or whatever,
Yeah. It's interesting because for me, what you just said so far is one of the things that is very important is that before you even start writing or doing anything is, who the ad or the content is meant for. Like, I mean, if you were to make an ad, then that is for, let's say, kids, right? It's stuff that we'll talk about, even though it might be funny for adults and relatable.
Yeah.
For kids, they might not really it might not really resonate with them. So you need to know who am I trying to talk to? And not just, okay, I'm talking to adults. Like, what kind of adults? What they do? Is it a 9-to-5 adult? Is it a entrepreneur adult?
Sure.
Like, what are the kinds of adults? That way you're able to create something that's relatable to them. And then you can really, work on something. If not, you could create something funny, but at the end of the day, the people you're trying to talk to, it doesn't resonate with them. And then, like, you have a scenario where your ad is great, but it's not connected with the people you want it to connect to. Instead, you're having other persons that completely not the people you want to talk to resonate with the content. And why that might look good, but at the end of the day, like, the whole purpose of you making an ad or making the content is to reach a particular kind of persons. And what's the use of communication if at the end of the day it doesn't reach those persons?
Right. But if you're selling, I think going back to that kind of strategy question about being able to shift, like, I'm selling maybe I'm making some assumptions about my audience, and if my goal is to sell a product or to sell myself, like also be willing to look at the audience that you're resonating with and maybe, okay, cool. Well, they like me. They like what I'm saying. They like my product or they have a service. Then like, how do I shift and speak to them more as opposed, and that can be different too. Maybe you only want like a different type of select. So you have to understand those are tactics and strategies you want to take. You know what I mean? Okay, well, this audience is great, but I know of a brand that I used to work with and I was speaking to about this recently is they had a product and it was at a certain price point, and then there was a lot of the economic stuff that was going on, and then they thought they were still speaking to this person that could afford it a certain way, and they realized their product was actually resonating with a slightly younger, slightly less affluent audience. And instead of changing that and shifting and trying to stick with this group that they'd been with, they were able to keep that one, but they really adapted and really, because they noticed this young art, and they made a different product that was a different price point, and they killed. And that became the basis of their business because they listened and they shifted. And I mean, again, with these tools, you can survey your audience directly. I mean, these big brands spend billions of dollars on who's my audience, what do? They test every commercial, they do all this kind of stuff. And that's all great, you know what I mean? But you can kind of do that on your channels. Hey, what do you want to hear about? What's your favorite product? What products do you buy that aren't my products? What do you, again, if you're going to products, again, and there's ways to check how the algorithm is treating your content. If you go on a friend's Instagram, let's say it's an Instagram thing you're doing. You go on a friend's Instagram and you can look up follow that. Instagram will feed you immediately like 4 or 5 other things to follow. And that's the algorithm at work. And you can literally see, who are they positioning me with? Okay, good. Let me go look at those and see those audiences are responding to. Yeah. Right. So there's all these different surveys and data points that you can do and use that audience. Put up a survey on a story. Do you want to hear about this or do you want to hear about this? Go on Reddit, go on YouTube and type in, are you are you a beer brewer and you're making beer at home? Great, cool. So find out, go on Quora, which is another online, and go find ask a very simple question, or just type in beer and then find out what are the most popular posts on beer in the last, if you go all time or you go the last year, right? And you'll have 100 things right there that are like the most asked questions on Quora or Reddit, right? Great. Okay, good. So now let me make content out of one of those that I know how to answer, things like that. So I think you need to use all those data points to figure out, and that goes back to that listening component, but it's a very active thing.
Yeah, very, very important. Like for me, it's, if not that the brand changed, listened, and then took action based on the data they got from what they heard, they would have ended up wasting money and nothing would have worked, because they listened and they realized that, okay, the people that is resonating with, they're different, so we have to create a product for them that that converts and all that. If they didn't listen and if they didn't take action, at the end of the day, what would have happened they could have decided to say, okay, because ultimately there were 2 paths they could have taken. They could have said, okay, let's make a different ad that resonates this time with this particular audience. That's if they want to stick with that audience. And there's some brands where it makes sense for them to stick with the original audience. And then the other part they took, which in this example is they did a pivot where they kind of created a special products for that kind of audience. And now because they listened, I don't really know what the numbers might mean, but I know that it converted well and it did well for them. And now they got a different set of customer base. But if they did not listen and if they did not take action, there would have been problem. Because a lot of content creators, they look at data points, do surveys, they do all those things. They get these answers, but they don't know what next. They don't know the action steps or any of those things. They are like, okay, yeah, I know that the majority of my audience, in the United States, they're female, stuff like that. Great, awesome. Yeah, I know the stuff. But they don't really know, okay, what am I supposed to do with it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to listen, you have to know, and you have to fully understand, who you're talking to. Again, that goes back to that conversation, and you might think you're talking to somebody and you're really talking to other people, but you really have to understand who that audience is and what they want to hear and what resonates with them. And sometimes you can ask them, sometimes you have to just try things.
Yeah. This question will seem to be coming out of nowhere. Is one of the forms of storytelling and content out there that has been popularized, I think, within a couple of years is the short form storytelling format, which is TikTok, Instagram Reels, Facebook Reels, and then the different platforms.
Yeah.
Do you think that the storytelling rules for short form content is different from long form content?
I mean, I think probably the obnoxious answer for that is yes and no. I think, at the end of the day, each one has its own thing, and these things vary. I think there's, I could list off, and I don't necessarily rattle them off the top of my head, but, TikTok responds a different way a little bit than, Instagram or Facebook, and they're slightly different platforms, and they're even arranged in the way their text is arranged and stuff. And there's different ways to go about it. People like to create content for just one thing, or you can create a great idea and then sort of slightly tweak it for different platforms, and different brands do it differently. I guess I would say that, breaking it into strategy and tactic, the problem is that strategy means so much in this world, so I wouldn't want to use that word. If you break it to, like, again, not a great metaphor, but like a war versus a battle, I would say the battle's a little different. You know what I mean? Like you have to use slightly different tactics with TikTok, you know what I mean? And those change. You have to understand, because certain things, and also, again, it's what your content does. TikTok only responds to 15-second or whatever, whatever the somebody told you. And there's stuff that goes long, there's stuff that goes short, and different categories perform differently. And at the end of the day, it's all good stuff to think with, but when you put something on and it works, use that. If it's 2 minutes, if it's 1 minute, if it breaks all the rules of that platform, but it's working, I can keep doing it. Try it again, see what happens.
Yeah.
So I would say that the battles are a little bit different. You have to understand, but the war, again, I hate this metaphor. I can't think of a better one though, I'm sorry. But again, like storytelling is the same. Character, conflict, resolution, what is the challenge or pain point your brand addresses for the audience? That's the conflict. What's the resolution? How your product or service, addresses that. The character is the brand persona. Is it an individual? Is it a spokesperson? Is it you as a content creator? Is it more of just like a, kind of an idea? And then how is that sort of, what's the kind of emotional tone of that? How's the emotional appeal of that? Is it funny? Is it fun? Is it heartfelt? Is it fearful? And all those things, work in, and you get campaigns that sometimes they're just specific to platforms, but there are campaigns that work across all these platforms. And the reason is because the storytelling works. And in fact, it works better that way because, these brands where you see they show up on your social, they show up on billboards, they show up on TV, they show up in the radio, they show up everywhere. And it's consistent because the story is understood. What they're trying to do, the conversation they're having with you across platforms work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the storytelling is in. But yeah, they have to tweak it a little bit to tell you this way or here or whatever. So I don't know. I think you have to do both.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that, and most people would not want to hear this, is that when you're trying to tell content, as much as possible, try to realize that you are trying to reach people, not the platform itself. I know the platform has algorithms, and at the end of the day, the algorithm is designed to monitor and kind of like measure how the people you're trying to reach respond and behave with your content. And then basically the algorithm monitors people, so you can bypass the algorithm and then monitor, or I won't want to use the word monitor, but kind of like study the people, such that even though despite what the changes the algorithm will make, you still get to reach people and connect with people, rather than saying, oh, I need to, what's the best thing now that I can do on TikTok to go viral? Yeah, it's more like, what can I create to resonate with people? And then,
and it's also a habit too. It's what's, well, I think, go ahead.
Yeah, I think
I was going to say that like it's, I think what can I do to go viral? It's probably the easiest question to ask, but like it doesn't, you're just trying to do a one-shot thing. And if you're trying to really create a platform for yourself and a brand, like it's hard work, and you have to be thinking more than a year down the line, more than a week down the line, so like, what's the thing that I can say that I want to talk about that's going to, because in 3 weeks or a month or whatever, let's say you go viral, right? And I'm not saying it's going to probably take longer than that, but I'm just saying, like, if you have a hit, it's a grind. It is a grind. The content creators, people that are just making content full time, it is a lot of freaking work. You know what I mean? And it starts to pay after a while. It can, but it's a lot of work and they have to love it. So what's the thing you're talking about that's going to get you, not when you're happy and inspired, but when you're like, oh God, I'm so exhausted. The last thing I want to do is make a freaking TikTok today. Oh, I got to make another YouTube video. What are you so passionate about that you're willing to talk about that day? Not today when you're excited about some new career, you're trying to sort of whatever, but what's the topic? What's the thing that you're uniquely qualified to talk about or say, or maybe totally not qualified to, but you're passionate about it, right? And that's your qualification. Like, what's that thing that will get you out of bed on those days where you don't want to talk about it? Because you're going to have to do that. That's your job now, and people, your audience will be looking to you to talk about it, not take a big break, because then you've lost your momentum and they've lost trust in you because they want to listen to what you're saying, because now you're serving them. So now you're not stuck there, but that's that conversation again. So, you have to set it up as something you're doing as a habit every week, every day, every month, whatever it is. It's not a get rich quick thing. It's a lot of work. And I think there are people who maybe have great success immediately, and that's awesome. But to sustain that, that it takes a lot of work, and they'll have to figure it out. Did I lose you? You there? Yep. It's going. It's at 5850. Yep. And it says it's uploading. I think you got it. Yeah, I got you. Can you hear me? It said three rapid fire questions. Well, it says it's uploading here. So hopefully, it should be in the Riverside server. It looks good. Everything looks totally fine on my end. Yep. 100%. The most, what? Sorry, I can't understand that first word. The most obvious? We were just cutting out. Yeah, it's breaking up just a little bit. Can you chat me? Ask me one more time. I got you. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yeah, no problem. You can just check out my work on my portfolio, which is just my name.com, gavinbellour.com. And, you can probably find me on Instagram or, places like that. But I'm a bit of a hermit because I spend so much time making stuff for other people. But yeah, reach out, say hi, take a look at stuff. I'm always happy to make new friends. You want to try? Did it stop? Do you want to try those 3 questions again real quick or no? Or it's done? I think it's done. I don't see recording anymore. Okay, sounds good. I'll be here. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah. So please, I will have to repeat the call to action again. Yeah, because so that it will capture my voice and everything. Me asking you, so everything will be seamless. Where can listeners connect and learn more about you?
You can probably find me on Instagram. If you look deep under the rocks and crevices somewhere, it's just my name somewhere. And then, of course, my portfolio online. It's just my name.com, gavinbellour.com. And, feel free to reach out and say hi. If you're interested in working together, you can always hit me up there. We can try to find something fun to do.
Are you on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, LinkedIn as well. You can find me there.
Yeah. Okay. The 3 rapid fire questions I'll just quickly ask you before. The first one is, what's the most overrated storytelling advice you hear?
What's that first word? The most what?
Overrated storytelling advice you hear.
Overrated? What is that word?
Overrated.
Oh, overrated. Oh, God. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah. What is the most overrated storytelling? I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind is be original, which sounds like, you know what I mean? Because it's like, yeah, obviously. I think if you're authentic, you're original, but
yeah, what does that even
how
mean?
many movies have you seen that are the same movie? You know what I mean? How many commercials have you seen the same premise? So yeah, you want an original take on that premise, but ultimately that originality comes from who are you and what are you saying to who,
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily original, it's your take. And so I think it's more authentic than original because, again, there's only so many stories you can tell.
Yeah. Well, what's an underrated tool or trick for better storytelling?
It was underrated trick?
Or tool?
I think just building a habit, doing it every day or doing it a little bit at a time, anything you can get out, I think sometimes it seems like a lot to confront. And I think if you can do a little bit, if you can set up your workspace, you don't need all the best new gear, get a mic, get a camera, and start with something that you have and make one video and then make another, but you don't always have to focus on the confront of, I have to make this whole thing all at once. Make a little workflow, record, and then certain days you'll want to edit, you'll edit. But just get in the habit, create yourself a habit. And if you build your habits really nicely, then you'll be chipping away at it every day, But if you go, okay, I have to make a video today, that's a lot of work. And sometimes you do that, and that's great. But I think if you build a habit in anything, this can be writing, this can be a new skill you want to learn. But I think if you can set up your life so you have a little piece of your day or a little piece of your week always dedicated to that, and it's just what you can confront,
Cool.
What you're able to do, and it'll build, and that's a good.
Thank you so much for that. What's one movie, show, or podcast, or book, or creator you think is a masterclass in storytelling?
Oh man, there's so many. The first one that comes to mind, podcast, is. There's this one called The Rewatchables. There's a site called The Ringer here in the US, and it's this guy Bill Simmons. He used to be a sports writer, but he has a pop culture kind of a really great group of writers, and they do podcasts. But there's one called The Rewatchables, which is just about, it's him and several other people, and they'll just talk about a movie. And the podcast is like an hour and a half. And it's usually movies from sometimes more recent, but often the last 10, 20 years. And it's this perfect blend, in my opinion, of like, it's like knowledgeable fandom. It's not like I know too much about it. I know exactly how a scene works and I know everything, but it's like there's a lot of passion and relish in it. And I think it's a really nice balance to listen to, because it's all movies, a lot of ones that I've seen or grew up watching, and sometimes I didn't. But for me, that's a really fun one. It's good for drives and good for like long walks and stuff like that, because it's just it breaks it down. And I think what it reminds me about is that at the end of the day, storytelling is not that complicated. We all know how to do it. We do it inherently. It's part of the human characteristic. And so, yes, there's techniques, and yes, you can get really deep and serious about it. And yes, you can strategize about it. But at the end of the day, like, we all know how to read a book. We all know how to tell a story. Just create that connection and create that emotion. And I think that's what's fun about those guys. And I think if you bring that into your work or whatever you're doing, it always resonates. So that's what I like to think, at least.
Thank you so much, Gavin, for sharing. And I know my listeners will get a ton of value from this episode. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, appreciate it. Yeah. Well, good luck, everyone. And thanks for reaching out, man. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's it for today's episode of Wisdom Journey. I hope it gave you something to think about or helped you feel a little less alone on your own path as a creator. If you'd like to support what I am building, you can head over to buymeacoffee.com/wisdomhq and literally buy me a coffee. It keeps the show going and means a lot. Also, don't forget to join my newsletter. The link is in the show notes, where I share deeper reflection tools I'm using, behind the scenes updates, and lessons I don't always get to cover on the podcast. It's free, and it's where the conversations continue. Thanks for being here. I'm Wisdom Okonkwo, and I will catch you in the next one. Until then, keep building, keep learning, and keep showing up.